Hello everybody and welcome to another video. Today we'll be covering a small 3D printer which has a very low price point and is supposed to be easy to use. Now, full disclaimer before we begin, I purchased this machine with my own money and was not paid to do this video, so everything you see here will be based on my own opinion. When I first opened the box, I was surprised to see just how few parts were needed for the assembly. Most of the parts were already wired and it looked like just a couple of components needed to be assembled. Also, the interface system was simplified to only use 3 buttons, which is a unique take on a 3D printer. The only component which needed to be assembled was the Z-axis, in which you put the wiring through the opening before attaching it with some screws. After that, all you need to do is to attach the filament spool holder with another 2 screws. Now, this machine is designed to work with smaller spools, so this will mean that the user will have 2 options when using this machine. Either you can order the spools which are the same type, or you can order a separate spool holder which will hold a regular size 1 kilogram spool. For my setup, I used a separate spool holder since this was easier for me to work with. However, doing so did increase the footprint of the machine. The instruction manual that came with the machine was well written, even if its binding wasn't the greatest. The good news is that the machine came with an SD card which has a digital version included. If they can replace the binding in the future products, it would greatly help polish up the user experience. Like most printers, this one also came with preloaded printable files, which you can start printing immediately with. Important to note is that since there isn't a menu system on this machine, I would highly recommend just having one file that you intend to print on the SD card at any given point in time. This does make it more difficult to streamline prints, however, this does simplify the printing experience. This machine is mainly geared towards novices, so keeping this in mind, I will be giving 2 separate verdicts as a result. Now, although some of their advertising shows children using this machine, I would never recommend a 3D printer be used unattended by an adult, let alone a child, since several safety issues could arise. Some of these include the fact that this machine doesn't actually possess a power button, which in itself is problematic. The only way to currently turn off the machine is to unplug the power supply either from the control case directly or through the wall socket. In my case, I used a power bar to achieve the same result. The thermistor was simply taped to the custom heating portion and also used a connector for easy replacement, so I was able to test thermal runaway protection. Thankfully, this machine does have thermal runaway enabled, which is great news considering that the firmware can't be easily modified, and we'll go through that in more detail later on. This machine does feature a magnetic flexible build plate, which is great, however, it tends to be way too sticky. As a result, you can see what will happen if you don't take proper precautions. To prevent this from happening, I would highly recommend covering the build plate with some painter's tape, since the prints will stick just as well to that surface and you can simply replace the material afterwards. Doing this will help lengthen the longevity of the build plate. Now, at the time of shooting this video, they were sold out of replacements. However, you can normally buy a replacement build plate if this one does become damaged. The build plate also isn't heated, so you'll be limited to either PLA or lower temperature TPU filament, which is fine for most people starting off. Before you start printing, you'll definitely want to level the bed, since this is normally something which isn't perfect when a machine comes out of the factory. To do this, you'll need to press the home button to move the machine to its home position. Make sure to place a piece of paper in the top left hand corner of the build plate before you do this. Using the adjustment knobs, you'll either tighten or loosen these until you're just barely able to move the paper. The only way I was able to move the nozzle around the build plate was by turning the belts themselves, so if you do this, make sure to be very careful since obtaining replacement belts wouldn't be easy given the initial design of this machine. If you decide to stick to the software that came with the machine, then slicing should be pretty straightforward. However, if you prefer to use a more mainstream software, then getting the machine calibrated can be somewhat difficult. These are just a small portion of test prints that I went through to calibrate, but there are some key components that will make your life easier. First off, this machine isn't designed to go fast, and since it's a direct extruder, you'll want to make sure that the retractions are turned off. These are the settings that I ended up using on my machine. These settings will need to be tweaked for your particular device since both each filament and machine tends to have its own nuances. The main website also does feature some recommended settings, so those will also be a good starting point for your printer. Now, one thing I did notice is that there's some design choices which could be problematic if repairs or upgrades are needed. One user mentioned that the belts are non-standard, which could be a very big issue should one of them break. Another issue is the firmware, since the company hasn't shared the source files. This makes any upgrades or adjustments an issue in the future. So as such, this machine really isn't geared towards a tinkering mindset. The nozzle itself seems to be attached using a method which I honestly didn't feel comfortable disassembling, since it didn't seem like it was intended to be replaced easily. The thermistor, however, does appear to be easily replaceable so long as you know what type is compatible with the machine. Once again, we don't have access to the source files, so we can't actually check to see which ones we need to get as replacements. The stepper motors are soldered to the board, which makes the connections more reliable. However, replacements would be much more difficult since it would involve desoldering them and finding compatible replacements. To the company's credit, the machine components are fairly easy to open up and access, so if repairs are minor, it may still be possible. Now, how did the prints compare to other machines? Well, this is where some of the issues start to creep up. No matter what I tried, I got a messy base on all my prints. Overhangs clearly suffered from poor cooling, and from closer inspection, I would say it was the design of the layer fan, which seems to only be cooling the top side of the prints. Also, this machine isn't the quietest, so having it in the same room that you're sleeping in would not be the greatest idea if you're running a long print. Once again, since updating the stepper drivers and firmware aren't an option, we'll be limited to what comes stock with this machine. As long as you turn off your retraction settings, you should end up with decent quality prints for the price point. So is this machine really worth the money? If you're just starting off and don't know if it's something that you'll want to keep using, then it's a pretty low risk option. However, if you intend to modify or use this machine for any type of production, then I would spend a bit more to get a device which is both repairable and upgradable. Nowadays, there's quite a few options out there for a very affordable price. Here's my final verdict. For a novice, I would give this a solid 6 out of 10. It works well as long as you know how to take care of it. If you're a tinkerer or using it for production, then I would give it a 3 out of 10 since it will be very limited in its use cases. So although I see this machine having quite a bit of potential, I do find that there's better options out there. Just a reminder to those of you watching that I will be posting a transcript on my main website, and if you want to go through the video in more detail, you can do so by changing the play settings. This can be done by hitting the gear icon on the bottom right hand corner of your screen and changing the speed settings. I hope you guys enjoyed this video, and I hope to see you guys soon. Thank you and take care.